She is the former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See and the learned hand professor emeritus of law at Harvard University. She's here to share with us her new memoir, In the Courts of Three Popes, an American lawyer and diplomat in the last absolute monarchy of the West. Please welcome back to the program, Ann Glendon. Ann, thank you for being here. So delighted to see you. I want to start with your being appointed the first woman to lead the Holy See's delegation to that UN Beijing Conference on Women in 1995. Now, I remember covering the Cairo conference just before this, and the Holy See really took on the United States over abortion and contraceptive policy. Before you leave for that conference, John Paul II told you that you would be a voice for the voiceless, and then he gave you some advice. What did he tell you?
Well, one thing he said, presciently, was that if you run into difficulties over there, try going over the heads of the conference to the press. And that's exactly what we did at midpoint in the conference. You mentioned Cairo. We came, the Holy See came to the Beijing conference with just the agenda that you mentioned. We wanted to speak for all the things that were needed for the most disadvantaged women in the poorest countries. And the European Union tried to make it into a replay of Cairo, the population conference. And we were determined not to let that happen. And so at midpoint, we just sent a press release to all the major newspapers in Europe, and we said, do you know what your European delegates are doing over here? Because the positions that they are taking are directly in contravention to many of the provisions of your own constitutions. And the next day, that was in the papers. It was giving rise to questions in the legislatures, and the EU delegates eventually backed down, and we got back to business.
No, it was amazing. What was it like, Ann, and for those who don't realize, you were the first woman ever appointed to head a delegation on behalf of the Vatican. What was that like? I know it couldn't have been all smooth sailing for you.
Well, I think that it was part of one of the many things that John Paul II wanted to do during his time as Pope, and that was to not only speak about women, as he did on so many occasions, but to model a certain way of dealing with the roles of women and the roles of the laity. And I think that modeling, not only by appointing me, but many other women to major posts in the Holy See, I think that was his way of communicating to bishops and priests all over the world. And he issued a famous letter at the time of Beijing where he said, I call upon all members of the clergy to re-examine themselves about their vision of women, and if necessary, as a demand of their faith. Imagine that, as a demand of their faith to adopt more positive attitudes. And I think as a result, we have now generations of priests and bishops who, like John Paul II as a young man, who have grown up with women, went to school with women, had friends with the laity, and women and men, married and single in the laity. I think that effected a great transformation in the church. And
Ann, you go on to be appointed after the Beijing conference and before. I mean, you were on the Pontifical Academy for Social Sciences, Pontifical Council on the Laity, the General Committee for the Great Jubilee. You're even invited to the Synod for America, which I remember covering, and you recount our dear friend, Father Richard Newhouse, who was seated just in front of you at that Synod, who said, not since that year in fourth grade under Miss Woodward have I experienced such tedium. How did that synod differ from the synods we've been seeing under Pope Francis?
Well, for one thing, everybody had a chance to talk. And everybody did talk. That's one reason why Richard said, I was sitting right behind Richard at that synod, and I could tell he was bored out of his mind. And he wrote that whole book while he was sitting there. It was a great exchange of ideas on the one hand, but on the other hand, you could sense already that there was a certain, I couldn't say what proportion, but a certain sense on the part of some of the speakers that the United States was to blame for much of what was going on in the world. And that was a kind of preview of attitudes that we would encounter later on.
You interestingly title each of the sections of your book, and of course it's in the title of the book itself, you know, it's in the court of John Paul II, in the court of Benedict XVI. How is it a court, Marianne? I mean, to the general viewer, they don't think of the Vatican as a court, but how is it a court, and how did you discover that?
I use that word very deliberately because after a while of serving the Holy See in various capacities, I came to see that it was impeded in achieving many of its aims as an international actor and as the central government of the Catholic Church. It was impeded from reaching its potential by an internal culture. Let me say a little bit more, but it was a court culture. It had remnants of medieval courts, but it also had a pervasive attitude of, how should I put it, an attitude of somewhat of relaxed attitude toward laws and rules. Let me put it that way. And my first hint of that was on my very first trip to the Social Science Academy, when I noticed that reimbursement for travel came in cash. This is 1994. Reimbursement in cash in little white envelopes on minimal documentation. And I said, and then, you know, as time went on, it came to me that most priests have nothing in their background and training that really equips them to manage the finances of a large organization or much less a sovereign state. And then add to that the style of governing of John Paul II and Benedict XVI was to leave everything, the internal affairs, to leave almost everything entirely up to trusted subordinates. And sometimes that worked out very well, but at other times, some departments and dicasteries became little fiefdoms. And so it was an unusual bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of an absolute monarch, but an absolute monarch who kind of created smaller monarchies. And that was a recipe for trouble, especially where finances are concerned. And it led to many scandals.
Yeah, and I want to get into that, Marianne, which you do in the book. But before I leave this topic, do you think that that court is stronger or more impactful within the Vatican today than it was even under John Paul and Benedict?
I definitely think that the greatest challenge for Francis and the greatest challenge for the next pope, whoever he is going to be the culture of the Holy See. It is immensely powerful. And we saw that. You know, Francis, when he became pope, to his credit, he immediately started attacking the financial problems. He brought in Cardinal Pell. And Cardinal Pell very sensibly said, okay, the first thing we have to do is have an external auditor to find out how things are. What's the lay of the land? And the auditor, Libero Malone, he no sooner got started when he was
off with his head
by fired by the number 3, very powerful then, Cardinal Becciu. And from that moment on, Cardinal Becciu resisted Cardinal Pell at every turn. And at that time, I was simultaneously serving on a commission to investigate the Vatican Bank. And we, too, we had a kind of general search warrant from the Pope himself. And yet we were resisted at every turn by the internal culture and the then president of the Vatican Bank. So this is going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, I want to get into that later because you do spend some good time in the book about that. And, but it does speak to that, again, that courtly culture of as long as I'm in good standing with the king, with the monarch, all will be well, and the rules are beneath me. And that really is how this apparatus continues to operate. But we'll get into that in a moment. I want to talk about something happier for a moment. While at a Vatican meeting, you get a call from Karl Rove. That President George W. Bush wants you to serve as ambassador to the Holy See. Now, you've been collaborating with the Vatican many, many ways, leading delegations on councils and pontifical academies. Any trepidation at that point when you got that call?
I have to say, I said, yes, I'd like to do that right away. No, I didn't.
Why?
I didn't I mean, if I had any hesitation, it would be, what would my husband think? But since it was only filling out an unexpired term, I knew my husband would be all for it. And I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to see the Holy See from another perspective. And I did think that having served in so many parts of the Vatican, that I would be able to be more effective as an ambassador in a short period of time. I would be able to hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, you might say, well, you've been a diplomat for the Vatican and you're so involved in Vatican departments. Would there really be a conflict of interest? But, that's what we lawyers do.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, and your appointment was blocked by a certain senator from Delaware, a Joe Biden, who people might know. He maintained that you had violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act. What was his gripe then, Marianne? And it was related to the work you had done with the Holy See.
Yes, well, as the State Department lawyers pointed out to the senator, there's a specific exemption in that act for work done for a religious organization. So I think the real reason I was blocked was, I say nothing personal, it was simply that it was close to the election and he didn't want to approve any leftover nominees. And, I wish that I could say, well, once they saw that, I wish I could say that the problem was solved when the Biden staff realized that there was an exemption covering me in the act. But in the end, I had to rely on my good friend, Ethel Kennedy, who she convinced her brother. She convinced her brother that he ought to have a chat with me, and I explained the problem to him, and I said, look, we really should have an ambassador in place when Pope Benedict comes next spring, and miraculously, I was unanimously confirmed by the Senate the next day. So
Teddy Kennedy helped push it over the top.
Yeah, it was solved the old Boston way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I look, Ann Glendon gets it done one way or the other. I love it. Tell me this. You thought because of your experience with the Holy See that this would give you a leg up, if you will, and an ability to see it from a different perspective and hit the ground running. Is that what happened?
Yes, I would say it was. It was a period of very good relations between the United States and the Holy See. The previous disagreement over the Iraq War was ended because the Holy See was now worried about the consequences for religious minorities if the U.S. should suddenly withdraw. So that on an official level, the relationship was good. And then there was this surprising friendship between Pope Benedict and President Bush. They really liked each other. No one could understand it. They were so different in so many ways. But my theory was, at least in part, that President Bush, thanks in part to Richard Newhouse, spoke Catholic, if you know what I mean. And I think that appealed to Benedict. In any event, they had three, this was unprecedented, they had 3 meetings in the space of a little over a year.
Yeah. What was the most difficult part of being ambassador for you, ambassador to the Vatican?
Well, this may seem trivial, but as I was told when I had the training period in Washington, forget about privacy. And I didn't really know what that meant until I got over there. And of course, I was used to going to Rome and freely walking around and enjoying the city. And it was a little disconcerting not to be able to move outside the official residence without 2 armed policemen. So I would say that represented quite a change for me as an academic to be so hemmed in.
Yeah. Tell me, what was the transition like? Because you had a front row seat. What was that transition like between John Paul II and Benedict? And what impact did it have on the Holy See itself? Neither, as you mentioned earlier, were great administrators. They kind of deferred that to others.
Well, it was a beautiful moment in a way. The funeral and Benedict's words, it was, I think anyone who was there or who saw it on television was astonished by what some of the things that happened. I mean, we were sitting there and the Mass was coming to a close, and suddenly a gust of wind came along, and the Bible, which had lain open on the coffin of John Paul II, suddenly shut. It was just, there were thousands of people who saw that happen. It was just amazing.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful moment.
It was beautiful, and in some way, I think we Catholics have been spoiled. We don't realize how lucky we were to have lived in a time when we had a pope who was both a philosopher and a major figure in the great events of the late 20th century, where we saw the seemingly indestructible totalitarian regimes fall. And then he was followed by another great pope who probably, I'll just guess here, probably someday will be considered a doctor of the church. It was an astonishing time. And I think actually one of the difficulties for Pope Francis, one of his challenges has been to come along at a time when he had to follow in the footsteps of really 2 giants, and it must have been difficult to be constantly compared with them. But if you look back over the whole history of the Catholic Church, if you read a book like John Julian Norwich's Absolute Monarchs, all the popes, there's never been 2 popes in a row like that.
No, it's a very rare thing in church history. And I want to get to more of this later, but while we're on this topic, Pope Francis promised when he assumed the throne to reform the Curia. Indeed, that's why a number of electors elected him, to reform the inner culture of the Holy See itself. Has he, in your estimation? I mean, he's abolished the Pontifical Council for the Laity. He's appointed some opponents of life to the Pontifical Academy for Life. Your thoughts on his refinements of the Curia? Are they refinements?
To his very great credit, when Pope Francis became Pope, he acted immediately on both of those fronts. He initiated financial reforms and he initiated curial reforms. He showed his awareness of the problems that I call the problems of internal culture. When he gave one of his major speeches that year, he called it Diseases of the Curia. And he set in motion from the very beginning both immediate incremental reforms and a commission to prepare a new constitution, which went into effect in 2022. So I think on both fronts, the financial reforms and the curial reforms, he came up against exactly what I've been talking about, the strength, the power of an internal culture that had been left pretty much without oversight over almost 30 years. And I would say he initiated in both areas reforms that I hope the new Pope will continue, but I hope whoever the new Pope, I think whatever the new Pope decides to do, he is going to come up against the power of that unique bureaucracy.
I can't let this pass. You mention in the book, you really deplore that Pope Francis abolished, I'll quote you. You say here at one point, his decision to abolish the Council for the Laity and to fold its responsibilities into a new dicastery for the laity, the family and life, was understandable as an economic measure, but it inevitably gave the impression of downgrading the importance of the bodies it replaced. You had to have a reaction to that. I mean, you wrote about it in the book. That didn't make you happy, watching that dissolve.
Sure, I was a member of the Council for the Laity for 10 years. But I have to say that I think we are going to see more of that sort of thing, because as of right now, the Vatican is in dire financial straits. It has a huge deficit, around $77 million. It doesn't have a plan to address that deficit. Income is down, donations are down, and that is why I think outsourcing has got to be part of the answer, and not a really difficult part of the answer. But I think there are more painful decisions ahead, and I think that the new Pope is going to have to look at other parts of, for example, I really loved the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and I was its president for 10 years. I could see certain structural features that prevented the Academy from reaching its potential. And I now think, given the fact that the best work in Catholic social thought really is being done in Catholic institutions, colleges, and universities around the world, I now think that one of the first institutions to be re-examined just from an economical point of view is going to be that academy.
But Marianne, you mentioned there about the financial malfeasance that has happened over time. Donations are down. I mean, a $77 million deficit. My question is, don't you see that attached to the vibrancy of faith and the commitment to faith of the people who've been making those donations? I mean, isn't that why you have this deficit? It's not just misspending of money. It also is you're losing your audience, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the prestige of the Holy See has been badly hurt in a number of ways. I think the next Pope has to worry not only about finances, but about the kind of reputational damage that has taken place, a kind of sense of, I think they're going to be looking for a Pope who will speak with more clarity and consistency on matters of faith, and I think they're going to be looking for a Pope who will be, let me put it this way, mater et magistra, someone who can, I remember what Bill Buckley said about that, and everybody probably will remember the same thing. Mater si, magistra no. But I think that the conclave will be looking for someone who will speak out strongly in terms of Catholic social teaching. I think that they're looking for someone who will speak out clearly on matters of faith. And I think they're also looking for someone who will take care of the house.
Yeah. Well, this Vatican Bank disaster, and you had a front row seat at watching this thing. I mean, the director, the deputy director were convicted of embezzling tens of millions of dollars from the bank. There was this atmosphere of fear. And as you said earlier, you all went in with a warrant, and it was a broad warrant from the Pope. What did your investigation discover? And I don't want you to get into all the intricacies, but in general, what did you discover? And was anyone listening to your findings, Marianne?
Well, we interviewed two of us, a bishop and myself. We interviewed nearly every one of the 115 employees of the Vatican Bank, and they were terrified. Even though we had in the papal document, we had absolute guarantee that nothing would go beyond Bishop Arrieta and myself, they were terrified of speaking to us, of saying anything to us. And that in itself was data, that this atmosphere of fear in the Vatican Bank. And as far as corruption is concerned, of course, that whole story is well known. And I was able to report to Cardinal Pell when he arrived in 2014 about the internal situation at the Vatican Bank. I think there are still problems of morale in the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank has certainly made some progress, but I'll just tell one story, which is a matter of public record, that imagine this. This is the new board of directors of the Vatican Bank. And I arrived that year, I think it was 2014, I arrived as one of the new directors, and there were only 5 of us at the beginning. It is a small board. Mm-hmm. And a month after I meet my colleagues, one of them goes on trial in Germany for financial felonies. This is the Reform Board.
It's unbelievable.
How does that happen?
And then you've got the Auditor General is fired by the Pope, with Béchu's instigation. You've got Cardinal Pell sidelined. I mean, there's multiple factors here that led to this corruption, Marianne. And I mean, it does run to the very top of the organization. It's not just the guy, the teller at the window, or the guy, filling out the audit sheet.
Well, the teller at the window became president of the bank, and he himself is a problematic character. Yeah.
I know you believe the laity is being called to a special moment here, particularly as we move toward a new papacy. You've seen the news where the Pope has appointed, Pope Francis, a special study group to report to the Synod this fall on holy orders for women after it was declared and settled by the last 2 popes that this was a no-go. I want your thoughts on this now, and what should the role of women be in the Church going forward?
I think that the role of women, I think discussions of that question tend to focus too much on church officials, and they let the laity off the hook. It is my impression that most bishops around the world are perfectly well aware that they need the services of laity with particular skills, that the laity, men and women, can enable priests to do what they're trained to do, what they do best, and what they were called by God to do. I think the new generation, now a few generations of priests and bishops, are very alive to that fact, very open to that fact. And I think there's too little talk about the responsibilities of the laity. We, after all, are the ones who are supposed to be primarily responsible for the transformation of the secular sphere. And how many of us really take that to heart? How many of us even attend to our formation in the sense that many of us spend more time learning about information technology than we do about how to answer Peter's question, give a reason for the faith that is in you.
Yeah, the conversation also, whenever women come up, it is now being diverted into talk of holy orders and ordination, and allowing women on the altar, which, when you look at the mainline churches that have followed this path, they're empty or dying.
I think that's going down the wrong path. I would say, what is the primary vocation? When we're baptized, we have a vocation to holiness and a vocation to mission. How are we in Western countries, we Catholics, men and women, how are we living up to that second thing? What our Protestant brothers and sisters call the Great Commission. In 2033, that's a millennium, a jubilee of the Great Commission. I don't think we Catholics are measuring up terribly well. So I don't see how seeking more clerical roles for men or women solves the problem, the real problem, the one that Cardinal Newman taught us to worry about, how to be fulfill the Church's mission in an increasingly secular world. I put more responsibility on the laity than I would on the church officials.
Mary Ann Glendon, well, thank you for modeling for so many people what lay involvement in the church can look like, both as a mother as well as a representative on so many levels. In the Court of Three Popes by Mary Ann Glendon is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Mary Ann, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.